Okay, make yourselves comfortable. I'll tell you a few stories and a few wise sayings. This is going to be talk number 8 in this series. It's called The Hair in the Ice Cream. Your daily dose of Dhamma medicine on the subject of frustration. Should I say weekly dose? Okay, well, today I'd like to talk about something very ordinary. Not enlightenment and not deep philosophy, just frustration. Because frustration isn't new, it isn't modern, and it certainly isn't any kind of personal failure. It's ancient, it's ordinary, and it turns up quietly mixed in with daily life. So, come for a short walk with me early in the morning. There's a man, he's making roti, rolling out dough balls in flour. Mopeds and motorbikes parked right across the pavement. Those slightly soft metal sheets over drains, and you step on them and you're never quite sure whether they're going to hold your weight. It's still dark, it's lovely and cool, it's peaceful. No traffic yet. People delivering things early. The market just beginning to wake up. A motorbike cutting around a corner. An elderly Chinese lady crossing the road with her granddaughter. A fruit stall holder sweeping the gutter. Nothing special, just life as it actually is. And then the day really starts. The sun comes up. And along with the comforts and the pleasures come little frustrations. A bottle lid that won't open, no matter how patiently you twist it. Plastic packaging that tears everywhere except where it's meant to. USB plugs that take 3 attempts before going in the right way. Spectacles sliding down your nose at exactly the wrong moment. A table that rocks slightly, just enough to be annoying. A door that sticks, but only when other people are watching. Sticky tape, when you can never find the beginning of the roll. Power sockets, never where you need them. Unlocking a door while carrying far too many bags. Washing machines with mysterious symbols and very long cycles. Tupperware lids that never seem to match the container. Supermarket trolleys with one wheel that has its own spiritual practice. Headphone cables that tangle instantly. Labels that peel off, leaving a gluey mess behind. Keys that disappear precisely when you're in a hurry. Passwords rejected, even though you're sure they're right. Autocorrect, changing words into something embarrassing or irrelevant. Dropping something, and as you bend to pick it up, watching it slowly roll away just out of reach. So this is where frustration actually lives. Not in crises, but in things just not quite cooperating, and we all meet it. I've noticed over the years that many of the things that unsettle us aren't planned, they just happen. Things turn up just out of the blue. In the Buddha's teachings, there's a simple image for this. He talks about 2 arrows. The first arrow is the thing that happens, the ones that we just saw. The second arrow is what our mind adds to it. So the second arrow doesn't arrive in just one form. Sometimes it's, why me? Sometimes it's replaying the moment again and again and again. Sometimes it's blaming yourself. Sometimes it's blaming the system or other people. Sometimes it's the demand that this shouldn't be happening at all. Sometimes it's the rush to fix, to force, to make it stop. Sometimes it's embarrassment that lingers long after the moment is over. Sometimes it's that quiet hardening of the heart, becoming a little quicker to snap, a little less patient. None of that is the original problem. That's the second arrow. Most of our suffering lives there. I remember once when I was standing in a meditation center, not this one, when part of an overhanging roof suddenly collapsed in front of me nearby. I went to warn the office. I said, hey, those roof panels, they're only held up by a couple of screws. The wood's pretty rotten. The builder was actually there. He didn't seem very pleased to hear this. In fact, he responded in a rather peculiar way, whichever way you look at it. At lunchtime, he sat down with his wife and had lunch directly underneath the remaining panels, as if to demonstrate that the laws of gravity were clearly exaggerated and didn't apply to him and his work. Nothing more happened. The roof stayed up. Lunch was eaten. But inside, something interesting was going on. Because the roof wasn't the real issue. The builder wasn't either. What matters was what was starting to form inside me. That tightening, that little surge of irritation, the sense of, why won't people just listen? And that's often how frustration begins. Not with danger, but with things just not behaving kind of as they should. Sometimes it's even gentler than that. I once heard a story about a man at a public garden event. He was introduced to the mayor's wife. She was eating ice cream from a glass bowl, holding it up close to her mouth. As he was talking to her, he noticed a long black curly hair in her ice cream. Trying to be helpful, he said, "Oh, excuse me," and reached out to remove it. And as he pulled it, only then did he realize it wasn't in the ice cream at all. It was attached to her upper lip. Now, nothing terrible happened. No one was harmed in the making of that story. I imagine that he replayed it again and again for some time. So that's another kind of frustration, not irritation, but embarrassment. The mind going back again and again to something that's already finished, long time ago. When you read history, you see this hasn't changed much. People have always complained about small things. Old letters and diaries and reports are full of it. Even in ancient Greece, there are records of elders complaining. Socrates, via Plato, laments the declining manners and respect of the younger generation, stating, the children now love luxury. They have bad manners. They have contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. So he doesn't actually use the word social media and phones, but it's the same stuff that we grumble about today, right? Civilizations rise and fall, but irritation carries on quite happily in the background. So as you hear those stories, you might notice a certain reassurance. What frustrates you today is not a personal failure. It's not a modern problem, not even a sign of getting old. It's just part of being human. Life has never been fully cooperative, and the mind has always been quick to complain. Not because life is awful, just because it's kind of got this unfinished, imperfect, and a bit unreliable quality to it. Impermanence, suffering, and non-self. So you might gently ask yourself, where does this show up most often for you now? Not in big crises, but in small interruptions, delays, and misunderstandings. Whether those moments feel heavy because they're new or because they're so familiar. Sometimes just recognizing how ordinary frustration is creates a little space. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to solve it. And in that space, a little humor, perspective, a little kindness can arise by themselves. So I want to read something. Anapanasati, joy, and the always available object. So there's something quietly joyful about this training because it gives you an object that is always with you. The breathing in and breathing out. You don't have to wait for the right conditions. You don't have to arrange your life. You don't have to fix the trolley wheel, the cling film, the door, the phone. The breath is already there. And the breath is flexible. Some people like to focus on the touch at the nostrils, the coolness and the warmth. A fine, simple point. Others prefer to focus on the throat, where you can feel the movement more clearly, and others prefer the belly, the soft rising and falling. Some people, especially when the mind is super busy, prefer the whole body. Breathing in, aware of the whole body. Breathing out, aware of the whole body. That choice matters because when frustration is present, the mind often feels cornered. It feels like there is no good place to stand. Anapanasati gives you a place to stand. And that's not dependent on the world cooperating. You can choose a small, steady place, or you can choose a wide, steady place. Either way, you're not helpless. And this is where it becomes joyful. Not the joy of excitement, not the joy of getting what you want, but the quiet relief of discovering, I can stay, I can be here, and I don't have to also fight. The Buddha didn't present this as a luxury practice. It's practical. Where irritation is building, you don't need a complicated solution. You need a safe, friendly home base, and the breath can become that. So you might experiment. When the mind feels tight, choose a wider field. Breathing in, feel the body breathing. Breathing out, feel the body breathing. When the mind feels scattered, choose a smaller point. Breathing in, that touch maybe in the nose. Breathing out, the touching sensation. And you may notice something simple. The frustrations haven't vanished, but the mind is no longer feeding them in the same way. There's a line from Wayne Dyer that I've always liked. He said, needing to have things perfect is the surest way to immobilize yourself with frustration. Needing to have things perfect is the surest way to immobilize yourself with frustration. You won't be able to move. You'll be stuck focusing on this perfect solution that isn't going to come. That's worth pausing on. because the training isn't about making life perfect. It's about learning to move wisely before resentment sets in. Small frustrations are not the problem. What we do with them is. If they're met early, gently, they pass. If they're fed, they harden. And once they harden, they start recruiting allies. Frustration doesn't just live inside individuals. It spreads, it becomes shared, and over time, it can settle into culture. Bill Bryson once pointed out how casually irritation gets encoded into language. Foreigners are described as contamination. Neighbors get turned into jokes. Whole groups reduced to a punchline. What's interesting isn't the humor itself, it's how normal it starts to feel. When everyone is carrying the same irritation, it no longer gets questioned. Ill will becomes easier to hold when it's common. And the danger isn't other cultures doing this. It's noticing how quickly we borrow irritation ourselves without ever checking it. So here's a quiet training cue. Notice when frustration feels justified, simply because it's familiar. Someone once described Italian parking as if order had given up, or it was recently a parking competition for blind people. Cars at odd angles, half on pavements, blocking everything. But what's really interesting isn't the parking, it's what happens in our own mind when things don't behave as they should. Irritation doesn't stop at noticing, it escalates, it sharpens, and it starts to even enjoy itself. So another training cue, just as gentle. Notice when irritation turns into a kind of entertainment, a mocking. That's usually the moment when it's no longer harmless. So there's a very simple practice you can try right there. Nothing fancy or complicated, no special beliefs, just working with what's already happening. The Buddha also noticed that when irritation starts looping, there are only a few ways the mind can actually deal with it. Sometimes we change the channel. We put attention somewhere else. Sometimes we can look at the cost. What's this way of thinking doing to us? Sometimes we simply stop feeding it and let it fade. So those are the first three. Fourth, sometimes we soften the body and let the thought lose its grip. And fifthly, sometimes we hold the mind steady, firmly but kindly until it settles, instead of just letting it loop on. And just repeat those. Sometimes change the channel. Just put your attention on something else and switch. Sometimes just look at the cost. What's this way of thinking doing to us? We're becoming really aggressive. We're becoming really angry. Is it worth it? Sometimes we stop feeding it and let it fade. Sometimes we soften the body and let the thought lose its grip. Sometimes we hold the mind steady and firmly but kindly until it settles. Different moments call for different moves. What matters is catching irritation early before it hardens into something heavier. So let's actually try this for a moment. Not as an idea, but as an experience. No need to necessarily close the eyes unless you want to. Just a small settling down. Feel the contact with the floor, the weight of the body, the points of pressure, feet, legs, seat, hands. Notice the simple fact of touch. Not thinking about it, feeling it. Now notice the air on the skin, maybe on the face, maybe on the arms, maybe at the nostrils, cool or warm, moving or still. Notice clothing touching the body, where it rests, where it pulls slightly, where it is loose. Again, nothing to fix, just knowing. And now let sounds be present. Not as a problem, not as a disturbance, just sound. Near sound, far sound, a motorbike, a voice, a fan, birds, just silence with small movements inside it. And somewhere in all of that, notice breathing. Not forcing it, not improving it, just recognizing. Breathing in, breathing out. If you like, feel it at the nose, or at the belly, or at the throat, or as a whole body breathing. If frustration is present in any form, a little tightening, a little restlessness, just include it in awareness. Breathing in, knowing it. Breathing out, softening around it. Not making it wrong, not making yourself wrong, just letting the system settle. And you might notice a small shift. Nothing spectacular. Just a little more space. A little less hurry. A little less argument with experience. That's the beginning of training. Not a deep jhana, not a special state. Just being here on purpose. And that on purpose is what changes things. When frustration appears, notice it clearly. That tightening in the chest, the jaw, the shoulders. And as you breathe in, you acknowledge it. Breathing in, this is frustration. Not judging it, not pushing it away. Just allowing it to be known. Then as you breathe out, you offer a wider perspective. Breathing out, may this soften, or this doesn't have to become ill will. Or simply, may others experience this too. Breathing in, you allow the unpleasant feeling to be present. Breathing out, you incline the mind towards patience, kindness, or ease. Nothing forced, nothing imagined, just gently changing what you feed. The situation outside hasn't changed, but the direction of the mind has. Often that's enough. I remember arriving at Singapore airport late at night from Australia. I was tired, a bit tense, looking forward to a taxi and a quiet arrival at the temple maybe. I started filling in the arrival form on an iPad provided by the airport. Name, date of birth, passport details. I began writing just before midnight. By the time I'd finished, it was after midnight. So I didn't turn into a pumpkin or anything. The screen informed me that what I had done was impossible. I couldn't have arrived on one day and still be filling the form on the next day. Apparently, it's impossible unless you're a time traveler or something. There was no one around. There was no explanation, no help button. Just a silent machine telling me that I was wrong. I felt it there, that tightening and that urge to argue with the screen. So, taking a risk, I stopped and I cancelled the form, took a breath and started again, slowly, calmly. And this time it worked. Nothing changed in the system, only the way that I met it. So let's slow down, because this is subtle, and subtle things are easily missed. When we're frustrated, there's often urgency and speed inside. The mind rushes, the body tightens, the story starts forming. And it can feel as if we have to do something immediately. But there's another option, a stilling option. Not passive, not collapsing and giving up, just not adding extra movement. So for a few breaths, do less, let the shoulders drop a little, let the jaw unclench a little, let the hands soften, and just feel the next breath. Feel the out breath. The small letting go that happens by itself. And notice the difference between the problem and the extra pressure. The problem is the thing that isn't working. The extra pressure is the demand that it should work right now. Or the demand that you shouldn't feel annoyed. Or the demand that you should be better than this. This is why the Buddha's training is so kind. It doesn't say, don't feel anything. It says, see what you're adding. See what you're feeding. And this is also where patience becomes real. Not as a virtue to admire, but as a pace, a bodily pace, a mental pace. So you might practice it in small doses, in the kitchen, with a Tupperware lid, with a phone that won't cooperate, with a form that resets at midnight. You take one breath, you soften one place in the body. You don't rush into the second arrow. And sometimes the most meaningful part of practice is simply not becoming someone whose heart is harder, not letting small annoyances accumulate into a harder way of living. Because the outer world stays unreliable, but the heart doesn't have to become brittle. And when the heart stays soft, daily life becomes workable again. Not perfect, but workable. Not polished, but human. Back to the early morning. The man making roti, rolling out the dough balls, mopeds and motorbikes still blocking the pavement. Metal sheets over drains you're never quite sure you can stand on. The darkness just before dawn and people delivering things early. The market still setting up. Life as it actually is, just life. And then the smaller frustrations creep in, trying to find the end of cling film, folding laundry so it actually fits the drawer, a window that sticks, glasses that won't stay clean, walking into a room and forgetting why you're there. On their own, none of these matters very much, but together they tell a story, not about objects, but about expectations. And this is where the Dhamma quietly lives, not in crises, but in these ordinary moments when things resist us, just enough to be noticed. And just noticing is enough.